start this. So today what we're going to talk about is, as I mentioned before, we're going to talk about Node and kind of make some contrast between what you've been doing in browser-based JavaScript with Node-based JavaScript. There are some differences that we're going to look into. First thing we'll do is just actually look up Node itself to see that we have a better understanding of what it is. Anybody remember what Node is as far as, or Node.js as far as our stack here? Server? No, not necessarily the server. We can create servers in it, but what is Node giving us?
So if we can create servers in it, is it a framework?
Closer. Any other ideas? No? You're thinking of Mongo, right? Okay. That's our M in mean. Is it a what? Compiler. Okay. Well, it kind of does that job. Does that job, right? So what it is it provides us a runtime for us to write JavaScript on the back end. And in our case, when we're doing it initially, we're just going to be doing it on our computer, not on a remote server. So let's look it up real quick on Wikipedia just to see, see what they say about Node.js. So here we go. Node allows us to run, it's right here, it is a JavaScript runtime that executes JavaScript code outside of a browser. And you could see this was created or initially released in 2009, and the creator was this guy, Ryan Dahl.
So Node.js is the environments we've been creating using Python so far, like without creating a new environment?
I see what you're saying. So yeah, in Python, you can run that server side, and you can also run it on your computer. It's the same kind of idea here. We can create an execution environment for JavaScript to run straight on the computer rather than through the browser. Make sense?
Yeah. Is there any reason we would want to do that? Like, wouldn't we want to make sure?
Well, yeah, because it's the mean stack. Right. We want to use Node in this case, but in terms of your overall question, yeah, you could have a project that was not using Node on the back end, of course.
No.
You could have.
I'm not saying not use Node. I'm saying why would we want to run the JavaScript like outside of the browser if that's where we're wanting to use it?
If it's already there for us to use in the browser.
Ah, okay. Well, because we need our code to be executing on the server side, not just the client side, because let's say a client makes a request and wants to obtain a resource. Let's say we're compiling that on the back end. We're doing that in Node. We're not doing that on the client side. So if you make say a GET request to a certain resource on our server, that GET request is not coming to the browser. It's actually coming to our server. Does that make some sense to you?
Yeah. So if we make a site that's pulling information from another API and they want to get information from that, they would have to use our site, and then our server that has the information would have to like connect to the API that we're using. Is that what
Yeah, sometimes that may actually happen, and that's a proxying situation. So our backend server is sort of acting as a proxy to go grab the information somewhere else, and then it sends it back to our front end, for instance.
But we don't want it to do that. Like, it's not going to do that through the browser. That's going to happen through our server as well.
Yeah, and maybe, so if we, and this is kind of getting off track, but if we needed to make a call to another service and say we had some secret keys that we didn't want to expose to the browser, we'll do that through our server. We'll make the call, get the information, and then present it back, however we wanted to do it. So that's essentially what Node is, and we want to touch on the fact that JavaScript used to be only runnable in the browser before Node came around in 2009. And in the same sense that we were just talking about, you can run Python on your computer in a shell, or by running a Python file, we can do the same thing with Node.js. So it gives us that same capability of running the code directly on our computer without having a browser open. Okay? And the first thing you guys are going to do as you get into the Node part of the curriculum is you are just going to download Node, put it on your computer, and install it. So let's go there and just see what that looks like. I've got over here the Node.js website. It's nodejs.org/en for English. And here you can simply download the, this is called the long-term support release of Node, currently 10.16.0. And then the bleeding edge version is 12.6.0. Don't download that. Download the LTS. The other thing you can do too, which I just wanted to touch on, is there's something called Node Version Manager. If you choose to install that on your computer, I'll look it up real quick for you. Node Version Manager. So you can see what this is. This is a simple bash script which will allow you to change your version of Node on the fly. So rather than having to reinstall or install a new version, let's say it goes up to 10.17.0 or whatever, and you want that. Using NVM, you can simply do NVM install that version, and it's a command line utility. It'll put 10.17.0 on your computer, and you can just start using it right away. I use it and I like it, but you don't have to. You can just stick with the regular, install 10.16.0 if you like. So that's first thing. You want to install Node on your machine. And then the other thing that you can do once you have Node installed is you can just check to see what oh gosh, can you guys see this? No, right?
Yeah.
Kind of. Let me
Node minus v, right?
dash v. Yeah, let me do something like that. Is that a little better? Okay. Okay, so here we go. So we get our version there, and if I wanted to check, if you're using NVM, you can actually check what is available on the remote by just running this command ls remote, and it'll show you all these different versions. You can see that we've got 12.6.0, and then these ones up here, these LTS, those are the long-term support releases. So once the next one comes around, I can simply go NVM install that next version and go from there. Yeah, Node-V will just tell you what the current version of Node that you're using is. All right, and the next thing I'm going to show you guys is just really quickly running a Node file in Node. So let's just create something here. Code test.js. And then here, we'll just log something. Say, hello, guys. And to run this, I'm just going to say node and then the name of the file. So it's test.js. There we go. Pretty cool, right? Now we're running JavaScript directly on our machine. We're not using the browser at all. So this is kind of different from what you're used to. The other way that we can run it, obviously we don't have to run a file, although that's typically what we will do. We can also open up a Node shell to run different functionality. So if I go node, it's going to give me an actual prompt down there. And I can just type in things like I normally would if I want to console log. We'll say hello from the shell, from the node shell. So there we go. Anybody know why we're getting undefined in there? Why that's popping up?
Doesn't return anything.
Correct. Yeah. So that anytime we run a function that has no explicit return value, it will by default return undefined. Very good. So that's just an example of running node from the shell. We can also write functions just like we normally would. So if I say function hello, oops, and then we'll do the same thing. We'll just say console log hello from the function. Close out my function, and then I'll invoke it down here. So there we go. So we're running node from the node shell. Now the other thing that's pretty important to be aware of, and we'll kind of go into this in some greater depth, is that there are differences between running JavaScript in the browser versus running it in Node. And there are certain things that are available in one place that may not necessarily be available in another. So to kind of show you what some of those differences are, first I'll just show you where you can find out about which functionality is available in which place. So there's a site here, and it's actually linked to in your schedule. I'll show you where. So here on Wednesday, you see where we've got Mozilla Web API. So this is where you can check on web-based functionality for JavaScript. And then the other link underneath that is the Node.js API. That's where you can go to check on node-based functionality. So let's test out some things and see what is not available in Node that we're used to using. So you may have used in the past alerts, right? You guys used alerts yet?
Yeah.
For anything? Okay, yeah, here and there. You might have alerted something. So let's just do it. Alert. What is up? There we go. What do you think might happen if we do that, if we try to run alert in Node? You think we're going to get a box popping up from our terminal saying what is up? Let's try it. Uh-oh. The shell does not have a box. Yeah, exactly. So this is kind of what we want to touch on, is that there are certain things that you guys may have gotten used to using in the browser that are not going to be available inside the Node execution environment. So another thing that obviously does work that we've been using is that we can still console log. So that still works. What about, so we've got alert, we did that already, let me just move that up. How about window? Have you guys used window at all in the browser? No? Not really? Okay. So let's just test it out. So we can console log what the window object is from the browser. and see that it actually is an object here. So we've got all these different properties here. We've got scroll to top, alert, application cache, all this stuff. We got ATOB. And it's all good if you guys have no idea what any of these properties are or mean. But the point is that we have this window object available to us in the browser. Let's try to see what happens when we console log window from the shell. Same thing. So we have this reference error. And from the hoisting exercise, you guys know that if we had defined something using the var keyword, and say we tried to access that thing before we had actually assigned it to a value, we wouldn't get a reference error if we were console logging it, for instance. We would just get some sort of undefined, right? But in this case, not only are we trying to access something that hasn't been assigned, we're accessing something that was never even declared at all. So we're trying to access window, but it simply doesn't even exist. We have not declared it. It is not defined in the node environment, so we're actually getting an error here. Any questions about this so far? Make sense? All right. Another thing that we do have access to in the node environment, but that we do not have access to in the browser environment, is this function called require. So if I'm in node, let me just create, actually we'll exit real quick, and then I'm going to create another file. We'll just say, we'll call this like data.json. Here, just put some prop in here, some val. Okay. So I've got this file data.json, and it's something that I want to use in, say, in the shell. Okay. So we'll go back into the shell, node, and let's say I want to access some property in this JSON object. I can simply require it. First, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a variable, and we'll just call this data. And I'm going to require it. So from the current directory that I'm in, I'm going to bring in data.json. And there we go. That returns undefined too. But it gives us access to this variable data, which will allow me to touch on any properties that were in that data object that I just required. So let's try to, we'll just console log data, see what that looks like. There we go. So I've got the exact object that I just essentially exported from the JSON file. You'll notice that inside the data.json, I didn't have to explicitly export anything. It just simply pulled it in exactly as is. So this is the JavaScript object notation that we've kind of been talking about a little bit here and there. Any questions about this part? Yeah. No? All right, and obviously I can access properties on that as well because we already have data saved to a variable. I can console log data.prop, which should give me val, right? Because that is the value when I call that key. So let's see if we can do this in the browser. So we've just used this function called require to bring in some outside file, right? Let's test it here in the browser and see what happens. Get to the button. You know what? Let me close this object because that's rather large. Okay, so let's try to require something. So here's another example. Oh, can you not see that? Is that better? Solid. Okay. So we ran into the same issue here in the browser that we did in Node, which is that sometimes certain functionality is not available that we're used to using in one environment versus the other. So this is a very important thing to notice, and if you're working on something and you're not sure if it's available, you can go to these resources and check the docs. Like we can click on this, and whoops, I actually accidentally downloaded it here. Go to where's the docs? About docs. So just go to docs, and it will tell you what version we're using. Or it will give you the documentation for either this, which is the LTS version, or 12.6.0, which is the bleeding edge version. And you'll see here that the documentation here references this term API. Does anybody remember what API stands for? A little louder?
Application programming interface.
Nice. Very good. Very good. So when we're talking about an API, a lot of times developers are thinking, okay, well this is how certain services are making their data available to you to make calls to get. So if I want to go get some data from, say, Amazon's database of products, I may use their product API. However, the term API is actually quite a bit broader. Every language is going to have its own API. And what that means is that they've built certain functionality into these languages that you can use without thinking about how they work. So back to the example of running an alert here. If I go alert, hi, I didn't have to think about how this works. All I needed to do is call the function. And somebody way smarter than me wrote the functionality to make this box pop up with whatever I put in there. So these developers who came before us have done a lot of great work to essentially create a bed on which that we can build things. And that's essentially what an API is it's just all of this wrapped functionality that we can use without worrying about all the underlying logic that goes into it. Just like if I want to plug in my computer, do I have to think about how the electricity is getting there? Or do I have to think about what's going to happen when after I've plugged it in and I hit the power button? No, right? These things have their own API already that I don't need to even worry about. So that's essentially, we want to talk about APIs just so you guys get comfortable not only with the term but also just what it means in a broader sense, because we're going to be hearing about APIs constantly throughout these assignments and the projects that we're doing. An API is everywhere. It's ubiquitous. Just that concept. We already logged the window object, so I'm not going to do that again. The other important thing now that we're talking about Node is this thing called NPM. And when you guys were doing projects in Python, what did you use to install libraries or packages? Pip, right? How about you guys that did Java? What did you use for installing packages? Did you guys install Apache? Is that what it was? Okay, Apache, okay. So most languages are going to have some kind of package manager which allows you to essentially track your dependencies for this specific project and also install new dependencies. So we can install dependencies, usually we can uninstall dependencies, and all that good stuff. So with Node, we have this thing called Node Package Manager. And for short, we just refer to this as NPM. And when you install Node on your machine, by default, that's going to come with NPM right away. So you'll have it. So if I can do the same thing that I did with Node just to check my NPM version right there. So my NPM version right now is 6.9.0. So you're going to get NPM with Node, but sometimes you may need to upgrade your version of NPM as well. And it'll tell you, so if say you're trying to install a package, it might tell you you're using an outdated version of NPM, so here's the command to upgrade it. You can just simply copy and paste in that command, and it'll upgrade NPM for you. So another thing that we're going to be using a lot in this stack is something called I don't know the pronunciation of this for sure, but it's called NoDaemon or NoDaemon. I like to call it NodeMon. But basically what this does is it allows us to write our code and have our code automatically refresh once we've saved a file. So if I make changes to a file, I don't want to necessarily constantly exit out of what I'm doing, go back and rerun that file. If I'm using NodeMon, it will automatically rerun the file for me. So the way that we're going to install NodeMon on our computer is we're just going to go npm install, and then if I do -g, that will tell it that I want to install this package on a global basis. So I want it available on the entire machine, not just specifically in the directory that I'm in. Go NodeMon. Okay. So we went through the process. You can see it installed it, and then sometimes you'll see these little messages too, like NodeMon. You can now support the project, so that's pretty cool. Now that we have it on the machine, what we can do, as I was saying, is we can run a file and have that file automatically rerun itself when we make changes to it. So let's try doing NodeMon against our test file here. So NodeMon test.js, and here we go. So we still log the thing, the hello guys that we had before, but let's make a quick change to it. So instead of hello guys, we'll change this to hello Wednesday. It's like magic. So NodeMon is making our jobs as developers way easier because we can just simply make changes to files and boom, it's going to rerun those files for us. So later on, when we're creating servers and we want those servers to refresh after we made a change, it's going to do that for us automatically. Huge win right there.
So it'll be refreshing if we're doing it on a. Is it still just using the Node.js shell, or are you saying like if we're using a browser as well, it'll refresh the browser when we make changes?
No, it's not going to refresh the browser, and NodeMon is running Node behind the scenes for us, but it's sort of like wrapping whatever we're running, so that it will automatically rerun those scripts whenever changes are detected.
Okay, so like when we were using Python and we made changes, we'd have to say exit and then rerun everything. This is just gonna do all that for us.
Yeah, that's a big pain in the butt, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so after you've been working on a project for a while and you keep exiting, keep restarting, it's it's obnoxious.
Yeah.
So NodeMon is going to make your lives way, way easier. And another cool thing about NodeMon is that you can actually call it with arguments. So if I wanted, by default, NodeMon is going to restart any file that's a .js file. So automatically, if you make changes to a JavaScript file in that specific directory that you're in, it will rerun the file or rerun your project for you. However, let's say I also have some HTML files in there, or say some, I can't remember if it does JSON by default. I think it probably does, but if you want to include something like an HTML file, when you make a change to an HTML file, you want the project to restart, you can call it with arguments. So I could say something like NodeMon, and then this argument E would allow me to specify what file types I want it to be watching. So I could say HTML and JS so that it's also watching any HTML files in that same directory. So that'll be helpful too when we're doing some templating, and that's going to be coming up, I guess like end of this week, early next week. But just so you know. So the main thing with npm and the thing that you're going to use the most is you're going to be setting up a project. So when we have a new assignment or a new project that we're working on, obviously we're going to create a folder for it typically. And so let's do that now. We'll just say make dir temp project, and then we'll jump into that. So I've got this this new folder open here that I just created. I'm going to open up a terminal, and a shortcut for all you Mac users is just Control and then the backtick will open up the terminal in VS Code for you. Yeah, kind of very handy. I use it all the time. So in here, what we can do is we can initialize a new project. So the way we're going to do that is we're just going to say npm init, and what it's going to do is it's going to ask us some different questions about the project that we're creating, and you can actually return through all of these options if you want to accept all the defaults. So if I return on this, it's going to set the package name to temp project, which is the folder that we're in. The version would be 1.0.0 by default. Description, I can add that in if I want. Some description. Entry point, index.js. We'll just leave that for now. Test command. Git repo. If you wanted to actually specify a Git repo for that, you could do that, or you could put keywords in as well. Author. Drop that in there. License, if we want to do that, so it'll do ISC by default. You guys can look into the licenses if you like. I don't know the site off the top of my head, but if you look up software licensing, you could see what some of the different shorthands mean in that case. So is this okay? Yes, we'll accept this. So what just happened over here on the left? We got a new file. It's this thing called package.json. And what this does is it gives us a number of bits of information about our project, the name, the version, all those things, all these questions that we essentially just answered. We didn't do anything with tests, and you can see it just creates that automatically. The other thing that we're going to see in this package.json are going to be our dependencies. So just like you guys had in Python a requirements.txt file, inside of this package.json it's going to lay out all the dependencies that you've installed for it. And one thing that makes this very nice is that, and we'll see really quickly, I'm just going to install a package just so you can see what that looks like. So if I go npm install express, which you guys will be installing, at some point in the not too distant future, you'll see here, there it is. So it tells us which version we've installed, and this little caret symbol is just saying we want at least this version, at least 4.17.1. So if our project had, say, 4.18.0, then that requirement would have been met. But what's great about these package dependencies is that when you create a Git repository and you specify in your git ignore file that you do not want to include the node modules directory, which actually holds, let me show you where that is. You see where the node modules directory is over there? So that directory tends to become really, really big, especially as you install more and more dependencies. But what we can do is inside of our git ignore file, we can explicitly ignore that node modules directory, which means that the size of my repository is going to be way, way smaller than it would be if I was including all of my node modules. Because like I said, that folder tends to get quite large. Because sometimes you install a dependency that has a whole bunch of dependencies of its own, so it has to install those sub-dependencies, and so on. Like basically until it gets down to the bottom of the line and there are no more dependencies to install, that's why this folder tends to blow up. It tends to get kind of bloated. So in this project, we're going to talk about a couple different modules that you guys will get familiar with, and one of them is called the FS module, and that stands for File System. So this is a native module in Node that you can call on without actually having to install it. And I'll show you how that works in a minute. Another one that we're going to use in the beginning is called the HTTP module, and you could probably imagine what that might be doing. Any guesses? HTTP?
Response?
Yeah, we'll be using that to send back responses. Exactly.
It has to communicate with the front-end server.
Yeah, so, well, it will be our server. So if we use the HTTP module, we can use that to create a server so that when a client sends us a request, we can send back a response to it. Okay? So let's just let's go back to the platform real quick, and there's an example here. This is on the in the node server section, and basically this is just an example of how we would write a node server from scratch. Not completely from scratch, because of course we're using these built-in modules, the HTTP module and the FS module. So let's just grab all of this code here, paste this in. So I'm just going to create a new file. We'll call it server.js. Paste in this code here. Let me get this out of the way. So let's kind of talk about what's going on here first. The first thing that we're doing is we're declaring this variable HTTP, and we are requiring the HTTP module. So we are assigning HTTP to what the HTTP module outputs. Okay? Same thing with FS, so we're declaring an FS variable and we're just requiring that module. Now down here, we're actually creating a server from the HTTP module. So we use this function create server, and then we pass it in a callback. And the callback here is just going to take a request and a response, and we're going to do something in here. So in this case, we're just going to console log the client request URL, and then we're going to also include the request URL itself. So let's run this real quick. I'll go back to my terminal, and we'll go node mon so that we can update it anytime we want. We'll go node mon server.js, and now you'll see we're actually running a server at port 6789. So let's go in here real quick. 6789, and then check real quick what routes we have. So if the request URL is a /, so if this is our index route, these are the things that we're going to do. We're going to use the file system module to read the file index.html, and this is just the encoding of the file, so we expect it to be a UTF-8. And then there's going to be this callback function, which takes either an error or the contents of the file. Okay, so assuming that I don't have an error, and we probably will because we don't even have this file currently, we would send back a response code of 200, so that means everything was good. We'll say the content type is this, and then we will write those contents to our response and then end the response. So let's try to hit that URL real quick, see what happens. Problem, right? If we check our console here, the first argument must be one of type string or buffer. So this index.html, it was actually expecting there to be an index.html file, and there wasn't one. So let's just add one real quick. I'll create another terminal window here, and then we'll go code index.html. And then inside there, we'll just really quickly do some boilerplate like that. We'll say hello. All right. Let's try it again. I think maybe I didn't run it with node mon arguments. So if we go back here, this is why we didn't get it refreshed. It would have actually restarted if I had used the arguments that I showed you guys earlier. So instead, I'm actually going to just Control-C out of this and then rerun nodemon. There we go. So we're actually rendering our HTML page that we grabbed using the file system. Okay? Any questions about this?
Can you explain what FS is?
File system. So it enables you to do a bunch of things with your files on your local file system. So let's just look in the docs real quick. And we are let's try guides real quick. Okay, so there's file system here. So if we're in the docs, we can look at this and see which functions are available. So the one that we were using was read file, right? So that's how that works. It's expecting these arguments. It's expecting at the very minimum a path, and then you can also pass it an options argument, which has these different properties: encoding, flag, and then we also need to provide the callbacks. You guys can see up here. These arguments are mandatory. Path and callback. Options is optional, and that's why it's inside the square brackets there. Okay, so besides read file, there are, as you can see, a ton of different functions that you could call from file system. All right, I think we're pretty much done. I just want to glance over and make sure we covered everything here. Any last minute questions about how these pieces work together, or how we create a server using just the HTTP module there?
This is recorded, so we can follow along step by step when we want to make one.
It is recorded. Yeah, I'll upload it. It takes a little while to process for some reason, but probably like within a half hour it might be available. Yeah. So there's also I've created a playlist for Mean June, and I believe you could subscribe to that playlist. That way, every time something's uploaded, you'd be alerted to it. So there's that. You guys excited about Node? I'm excited about Node. Get to it, or to Sports Day. Yeah.
I got a question.
Okay,
It's
hang
not
on.
about Node.
Yeah, hang on.